organizing and cultivating support for urban and rural pollinator plantings. She holds a BA in environmental science from BU. And we want to welcome you both and thank you for coming to help shed some of the information that you have to help us in our work here. I think it's right on target with many of the things we're trying to do. And I also, before we put you on the spot here, I just noticed Linda Coles is with us too. Welcome, Linda. Do you want to say hello to everybody before
I'm sorry, I'm late. I got distracted.
Okay, and I'm going to try to watch the chat in case anyone has some questions in between. And I hope with Jessica up there in the corner and Bern and Tom, they've both done this before. We'll get through the technology part. Maybe someday we'll be able to do it in person. So I'm going to let the two of you, Rishya and Paige, get started, and welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to say, Kathy, Jessica, thanks so much for having us. I think we're so incredibly excited to be speaking to such an active group, but also such a community-based group where Chelmsford is really your core, and you're also dedicated to where you are. So I am very excited to kind of bring strategic climate communications and I think Paige's expertise on natural-based solutions to all of you, and we'll have a really great discussion about it. Great. So, Paige, do you want to set up the PowerPoint screen share?
Cool. I will share now.
Okay, it worked.
Right.
Oh. Great. Okay. So we, like Kathy said, we'll be talking about strategic climate change communications, but we're also going to be talking about solutions-based communications, better yet, solutions that exist right here and right now, and those are nature-based solutions. So before we kind of get started, I want to encourage all of you, I really want this to be a discussion. So ask any questions in the chat. You know, there'll be some interactive opportunities. You can unmute yourself and talk and engage with us. If you don't feel like unmuting yourself and talking to the group, you can also just put all your opinions and questions and thoughts down in the chat. But let's really engage with each other and make this a conversation. Right, next slide. So I think we can skim past this a little bit because Kathy introduced us so well. But hi, again, I'm Rishya. You can also call me Rish. I'm Mass Audubon Statewide Climate Change Communications Manager. And Paige?
And I'm Paige. I'm Climate Resilience Coordinator at Mass Audubon.
Next slide. So I am really curious. It seems like most of you have heard about Mass Audubon before. So like quick show of hands if you have your video on. How many of you have heard of Mass Audubon? Okay, great, all of you. Okay, that makes me very happy. But how many of you knew that Mass Audubon did climate action work? Raise of hands. Cool, great. So it's good that we're here today. But Mass Audubon, we have dedicated ourselves to urgent and bold climate action in order to reach a carbon neutral future by 2050 with the goal of maintaining a livable environment for both people and wildlife alike. And we aim to do this through four main ways. We aim to do this by building an informed and passionate constituency at all age levels across the region. We aim to do this by conserving and stewarding natural lands that mitigate the effects of climate change, also helping us adapt to climate change. We also very much aim to pass impactful climate-related legislation and policy from local to federal levels. So we really push that carbon neutrality goal that kind of matches with the carbon neutrality goal happening statewide right now. And we also internally aim to eliminate Mass Audubon's carbon footprint. And kind of inherent in all of these goals is the idea of talking about climate change and making climate change something that communities can act on, converse on, connect on, and then really come together to push to make a difference. Next slide, please. Okay, which brings me to one of the best ways to kind of bring communities together, like you all have been doing with this climate action team, is to talk about climate change. And when we think about talking about climate change, we're really telling a story. No matter what format it is, we're telling a story. So I want to ask all of you, really quick question. When was the last time you consumed a story? Whether it's a TV show, a podcast, a book, whatever it was, what was it and how did it make you feel? You can either put it in the chat, you can unmute yourself and let us know, we can talk about it. What was it and how did it make you feel?
Are we unmuted?
You can unmute yourself and talk about it if you'd like.
I read a book just recently called The Story of More by Hope Jaron, which was about climate change. And it was a real climate story for sure. Very good.
Yeah, how did it make you feel, Tom?
It made me feel like I'm on the right track.
Right.
You know, it made me feel like there are simple ways to explain the problem in a very persuasive way that, you know, is not overly technical, but, you know, it just is very strong and people can understand, and even people who really aren't into it like we are. It seems like the only people that agree sometimes are people who know the problem of climate change, you know, to a deep level. And it shouldn't have to be that way. It should be an easy story to convey to people, you know, that they'll understand and agree with, hopefully.
Excellent. Really good. Anyone else?
Oh, I'll go. So about 2 weeks ago, I attended via Zoom a lecture by an economist. Her title was Economics of Climate Change, and it was really very interesting. She packed an enormous amount of information into, you know, a 45-minute presentation. She spoke very quickly, but one of the things that she pointed out that was sort of a revelation to me was this idea that I know people in this country are saying, why should we bother to spend the money on trying to, you know, fix climate change when countries around the world are, you know, particularly the developing countries, are just, you know, building coal-fired power plants. And her point was that in a way, the US has exported our climate emissions because we used to create all those climate emissions when we were manufacturing everything. But now we've outsourced all of our manufacturing to China, you know, primarily, and other developing countries, and yet we're still consuming all of those products. So in a way, all that pollution being produced in China is still kind of at our doorstep. I just thought that was a really eye-opening concept.
Yeah. Julie, I'm hearing maybe you felt knowledgeable, you felt like your eyes were opened. You know, Tom, I'm hearing you felt validated, understood. You maybe even felt a little bit inspired by the book. How about one more story? Anyone else?
I actually wasn't sure if you wanted our stories or if some other story that inspired us, but I actually saw a webinar this past week by Rebecca Henderson, and I think she's a professor at Harvard and was also at MIT. It's called, her title is Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. And it was so inspiring. I just got so excited listening to her. I felt like this is the way to save the world, you know, and I mean, in so many ways, but she did talk a lot about climate change.
Yeah.
But I recommend the book, or just go on and listen to her do a video. There's a lot on YouTube with her. Wonderful.
Sure. Excited. That's a great word that we don't often hear when it comes to climate change and climate action. That's great.
Well,
Vernon, I saw you. I saw you raise your hand. Why don't you go ahead and then we'll move on.
Oh, who is that?
So yeah, Tom mentioned one book, Excuse me. Another one that I recently read was called Why We're Polarized. And it was by Ezra Klein. And it gives a story of why it is we think differently. And I think it's a very, it was very meaningful for me because I've been sort of a hobbyist in trying to understand our politics. And politics are at the cornerstone of the climate solution. We're not looking for technical solutions. We're looking for political solutions.
Right, Bern, really astute observation there, right? You felt like this was meaningful, right? You felt maybe even though you're a hobbyist, that this had an impact on you. And I think, Paige, if you want to go to the next slide, all of these stories, you're all a very special group because these are all climate stories. Sometimes I get all sorts of, I heard Handmaiden's Tale once, which isn't completely related to climate at all. People give me all sorts of stories, but all of these have something in common. And the thing they have in common, the common thread, is that they make us feel something, which might seem a little simplistic at most, but stories are really tools in our toolkit that we should use that help us reach a place of empathy in people that we want to reach, we want to connect with, and we want to move to action. Now, when we talk about something like strategic communications, at its core, whether you are writing an article, like Julie mentioned that she wants to write, whether you are writing a book, talking to a news reporter, stories are the core of strategic communications. And they allow us to humanize and personalize something that can seem very inaccessible and very kind of amorphous, like climate change as a crisis and a phenomenon. The issue, which this group does not represent at all, the issue with talking about climate change is that most Americans don't. They just don't talk about climate change. So according to the Yale program on climate change communications, fabulous research group. I highly encourage you all kind of Google them and read through some of their reports. In their 2019 November report, they found that over half of all Americans either rarely or never talk to their friends, families, and people around them about climate change. And when we think about what we need to do to move people to action, this is a huge obstacle. Because not only does it mean we're not talking to our friends and families about climate change, it also might mean we're not talking to our communities. It also might mean we're not talking to our local elected officials who, like Bern so astutely said, are really some of the forces of change that we need to tackle this crisis. So telling our stories, telling stories in general about climate change gives us a place to discuss feelings, to discuss actions, values, and solutions, all of which are essential when we're moving people to action. Next slide, please. So I'm going to assume that all of you know the basics of climate change, being in this kind of climate action team or very heavily involved in climate action. So we know that climate change comes from this practice of burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. And when we burn these fossil fuels, they release greenhouse gases, but they release excess greenhouse gases. We also call it rampant greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The most rampant greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. The atmosphere, this is one of my favorite metaphors, wraps around Earth like a blanket, trapping heat inside of Earth, just like a blanket does. And when we release all those excess greenhouse gases, they make this blanket thicker, which makes the Earth warm very rapidly. And that hurts our plants, our animals, and our communities, people too. So climate change is really a global issue. Julie, you talked about how it's, happening all over the world, how Western countries are very much responsible for historical greenhouse gas emissions, but those emissions impact everyone. The issue with it being such a global crisis, a global problem, is that sometimes it's hard for us to take something so global and distill it down into something visible that our communities can see, especially communities who are detached from climate change as an issue. So next slide, please. And this is where we'll get into a little bit of what I like to call psychology 101. This detachment, this distance, is called psychological distance. So what does it mean to be psychologically distant from climate change? Based on all of your intros and what you told us about yourselves, all of you are pretty psychologically proximal to climate change. So psychological distance is essentially how detached you are from the crisis. And there are four kind of sectors or themes of it. There is hypothetical distance. Is climate change happening? There is spatial distance. Well, where is climate change happening? Is it happening here? Is it happening in developing countries? When does climate change happen is temporal distance. So is it happening right now? Or is it gonna happen in the future? It's done. We already dealt with climate change. I think we know the answer to that. And then there is social psychological distance. So who is climate change happening to? And based on a variety of research, including from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications, Americans score really, really distantly in all sectors except for hypothetical distance. So the good news is right now, we know that a record high of Americans believe climate change is happening and it is human caused. However, most Americans don't think it's happening right here in their communities. They think it's happening across the world. Most Americans don't think it's a problem happening right now. They think it's a problem for 2050, 2070. It's not happening right now. And most Americans don't think it's happening to themselves or the people around them. They don't view it as a problem impacting their friends and their families. And so by strategically communicating, AKA telling stories and narratives about climate change, we can help increase how close our audience feels to the crisis by helping them and guiding them in visualizing the crisis as temporally proximal, spatially proximal, and socially proximal. Next slide, please. Okay, I want you all to put on your critical analysis goggles. This is one of my favorite stories that actually one of our own Mass Auduboners wrote. This is by Andrew Ahern from Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary. And what I want you all to do is I want you to read this blurb. It's a nice climate story. Better yet, it's a personal story. I want you to read this. I'll give you around like 3 to 5 minutes. And we're gonna talk about some things on, how you felt, what this meant to you, what stood out to you. So I'll give you all 3 to 5 minutes. Paige, I think there might be a link in the notes of the PowerPoint if you wanna just throw that in the chat for me. If you can't read it on the PowerPoint screen, we'll give you the link so you can read it on the website. Great, so have at it. Oh wait, Paige, I might actually be able to do it because I don't want you to, I see you left clicking right now on the screen.
Yeah, I might have to exit out to get to it, so.
Okay, I'll figure it out.
You're blocking the text.
It is in the chat. Sorry about that.
Oh man. Very powerful.
How are we all doing?
I'm done.
Done.
Done? Need a little bit more time?
And did you say that the link you just put in brings one to this piece by Andrew?
Yes, it does. I kind of cut and pasted some of the lines, so you'll read a little more exposition in between all of it.
Okay.
So great. All right, Paige, if you want to take us to the next slide. Okay, so this piece definitely has a very specific audience, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these questions that we have on the slide presentation right now. How did it make you feel? Anyone want to take a crack at that?
I'm happy to, because I feel very strongly about what he said, and it makes me almost want to cry. It's just the first line. And I've always felt very strongly that, you know, when I guess this has been something that's bugged me for a long time. But then when I saw little Greta Thunberg standing there with her sign all by herself, and then it took a couple of years, but now it's a movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I keep thinking it's the adults, it's the older people who were actually able to live all these, you know, very comfortable lives and get everything at, you know, the snap of their finger, and use up all the resources, or so many of them, that should be doing something. We shouldn't leave it to the kids. And I guess that always drives me crazy when I used to hear people say, well, this is the world we're leaving, our kids will have to make it better, or, you know, that's kind of a selfish attitude. And it's almost debilitating thinking about climate change. So being able to do something, I do agree with Andrew's assessment. When you take some action and do something, I mean, when we started this group, I just felt like, you know, it's something positive that we can do. It makes me feel more hopeful, because I feel like, yeah, if we can do it, you know, other people can too. And but anyway, I'll stop, because it's a very powerful piece that Andrew.
Yeah, and you know, I love to hear all the emotions that it brought up. I hear the grief that you connect with. I hear, you know, the hope, because not only did you connect with the fact that Andrew created or is a part of a movement, but you have your own movement with the climate action team in your own community. So I hear that as something you're connecting with in this story. What about the rest of you? You know, is there something you connected with? Is there something that you value that the story presented?
I can go. Oh, sorry. Go, Julie.
Oh, sorry. I liked the sentence that ended with, so no one can claim boredom. There's too much to do.
Very true.
The other thing I come across when I do talk to friends sometimes is just this that people are just overwhelmed by the problem, the issue, and they just feel that it's too late. We can't do anything about it. So I liked seeing that. You know, there's a lot to do, and you know that this is a time for global coming up with solutions to global problems.
Right. Great. Tom, what about you?
Yeah, it reminded me of a few things. I had Yuval Noah Harari has written about the future and how there won't be anything for especially young men to do, because in the past they've been just used for fighting wars and for doing manual labor. And you know that with the AI and the you know, there won't be the work. And then and related to that, I remember reading something about a young girl when talking to some world leaders or something, saying, but are we finished? Is it all done? Meaning that, you know, there's so much to do to solve these problems facing us. And I really like the idea, and I think this speaks to the issue of the that Byrne mentioned about polarization. So the people who see this as a movement, that we need to come together to resolve it, to help solve it, are so different than the people who think about individualism. That your whole purpose in life is to aggrandize to materialism, and to seek your own selfish pleasures, and whereas this kind of movement means, and we have to, it's global.
Mhm.
We all have to come together, so to me that's positive, encouraging,
Yeah.
that if people can think that way instead of nationalistically and individualistically.
Mhm.
I think McGibbon said something on that,
Mhm.
about individualism. I'll have to find the quote, but
It's a great point, right? At Mass Audubon, and my personal soapbox, and I'm sure Paige has heard this many times, it's all about community action, right? It's all about being a part of something greater than yourself, right? All in this together kind of feeling. So Paige, do you want to go on over to our next slide? I want to wrap up so you have time to talk about solutions. So I'm going to give you all a couple of cheat sheets, tips and tricks on how to tell your climate story. So these narrative elements to me are the most important thing to include whenever you're telling a story. And again, we'll go back to this point of stories being much more than just a book you read. They can be an article, they can be a podcast, they can be you talking to a person you know, an acquaintance, or a local elected official to push for climate policy. So the first thing you always want to include when you're telling a climate story is called an object of care. An object of care doesn't have to be an object, but it is at its core of value, something that you care deeply about that other people are going to care about too. Eric, you mentioned birds and how much you love birds. That's an object of care. Kathy, when you were speaking to me about the role that adults have in not only protecting children and the youth of the future, but also helping kind of create a cleaner future, that object of care is youth, children, a future, right? In this story that we read from Andrew, the object of care is community. It's this community support and solidarity that he found with other people in the movement. You always want to have value in your story. The next narrative element you want to have in your story is called a frame. And a frame is essentially picking certain aspects of what you're talking about to elicit a specific response. And it's really what glues object of care to reducing psychological distance together. So a frame could be, for example, public health. We could be talking about asthma, increased allergies, urban heat islands. Another frame could be a legacy frame. I want to protect the children of the future because I want to leave the future a better place. Another frame could be a conservation frame. We need to protect biodiversity. We need to protect the animals of this world and the flora of this world. The third most important narrative element is a localized focus. So we've talked about how climate change is really this global problem that does require big solutions and big actions. However, one of the most impactful ways to get your community acting on climate is to talk about what's happening where you are right now. What can you visualize in your backyard? Robins, for example, the ones that do migrate, have been migrating earlier every year. And so one way to, localize climate change, warming of of Massachusetts, shifting seasons, is to provide an example, that visual and that present, like robins migrating earlier, or your favorite flowers blooming earlier than they would, or maybe more frequent flooding and storm surges when you live on the coast. And the last thing to always include are pathways to engagement. We've talked about how, and I think Kathy, you mentioned this, we feel grief sometimes when you talk about climate change, anxiety, despair. And psychologically, one of the best ways to combat that is to always provide solutions when you talk about climate change. Okay, sea levels are rising. What can we do about it? And that's really what separates doom and gloom communications, which sole focus is to make people feel upset, towards climate action and climate solution communications, which makes people connect with the value and then feel incentivized to act to protect that value. Next slide, please. So distilled down into a 4-step cheat sheet. 1, start with value, your object of care. 2, share your experience or your community's experience, town, neighborhood, state, whatever it might be, of here and now. 3, focus on solutions, always provide solutions, those pathways to engagement. And 4, we're all in this together. Climate change is no one person's problem. We can talk about corporations, but no one person's problem. So we need to work together as a community, as a movement, to solve the crisis in the scale that it needs to be solved. Next slide, please. And speaking of solutions, next slide, Paige. We know what we need to do to solve climate change. Better yet, some of these solutions exist already. So to solve climate change, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, remove greenhouse gas emissions, the excess ones, and then adapt to whatever is happening to us because of climate change. Next slide. So there's climate mitigation, which means reducing or preventing excess greenhouse gas emissions. Some of these actions involve soaking them right up like a sponge out of the atmosphere. Next slide, please. And then there's adaptation actions, which is those strategies that help us contend with climate change's impacts that are happening already. So think sea level rise, think extreme heat, think extreme storm events. Next slide, please. And these solutions, as I mentioned, they actually exist right now. We don't need to wait to start taking steps towards solving climate change, especially when we look towards nature and when we inspire strategies from nature. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Paige.
Awesome, thanks Rish. I'll start sharing.
All right, and then just give me 1 second to screen share myself. All right, let's see. Screen share this. And then we are going to share computer sound. All right, ready to go when you are.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about nature-based solutions to climate change, as Rich introduced. But first, let's hear about it from Greta Thunberg. So Andrew mentioned her, and he mentioned the Sunrise Movement, and she's the co-founder of the Sunrise Movement. So she has gained international recognition for her work on climate change, and I thought it was best to hear it from her first.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about, but what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
Everything counts. What you do counts.
Awesome. So you can do next slide, please, Rish. Yeah, so I absolutely love that video and I love sharing that video. Greta obviously has an incredible story and she frequently speaks of her story, similarly to Andrew, and how she is so young and this is her world that is being harmed and her future that is being implicated here. So that was obviously quite a large scale, that video, but I work mostly on a more local level. So first off, I'm just gonna define nature-based solutions, and this is how Mass Audubon defines it. So it uses natural systems, or it mimics natural processes to mitigate climate change by absorbing and storing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and addressing expected natural hazards from climate change, like flooding and drought, from coastal storms and changes in our precipitation, erosion, and urban heat islands. So when an urban area becomes especially hot with the rise in temperatures. So nature-based solutions can be natural areas like a plot of forest that's been intact for 100 years, or it could be a small garden or a number of trees that we plant in our community. Next slide, please. So here you'll see three types of nature-based solutions. So Greta talked about funding. So since I work on more of a local level, I focus a little bit less on that national funding issue. So instead it's open space preservation, low impact development, and ecosystem restoration. So in action words, we refer to this three-step approach as conserve, integrate, and restore. And in the next slide, I'm going to describe all three of those. So all of these nature-based solutions address multiple hazards to humans, like riverine flooding, coastal flooding, etc. And they provide co-benefits to communities, including avoided costs from, avoided impact to infrastructure from storms, for example, enhanced public safety and public health, and environmental services like improved wildlife habitat. Okay, next slide, please. So a great thing about nature-based solutions is its diversity. So it can really be done at any scale, from the most rural communities to the most urban communities. So when we think about sustainable land use planning in the context of climate change, we want to, number one, conserve. So conserve natural green infrastructure that already exists and is providing us all of these great free natural services. So this image here shows what's called a conservation subdivision, and it uses flexible lot sizes to allow for shared open space protection. Number 2, integrate. So integrate low impact development when you're building new infrastructure. So this image here, this curb cut, allows stormwater from a large rainstorm to flow into this bioswale, which is basically just a channel filled with soils and plants, and infiltrate rather than running off and potentially harming our infrastructure and our water supply. And lastly, 3, restore. So restore local resilience through low impact development in redevelopment. So on the top, on the left, you'll see a very wide sidewalk, all impervious surfaces that water cannot infiltrate through. And then on the right, you'll see an example of what could be done in a redevelopment. So instead of having a wide sidewalk, they've replaced some of that sidewalk with a bioswale. So it's absorbing water from a large rainstorm, and at the same time, it's providing other co-benefits and services like cooling this town during a hot summer day, and it also clearly beautifies the area. And on the bottom, that is actually our education center at Mass Audubon's Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary. So it was redeveloped several years ago, and it incorporated this rain garden which treats stormwater runoff from our parking lot before it enters the storm drain, and it contributes to better water quality in Broadmeadow Brook, which is a central piece of that area and that community. It's really important for it. Okay, next slide, please. So I've used the terms green infrastructure and low impact development. So you'll find that these sometimes are used interchangeably, but I find that it's helpful to describe the relationship between them before continuing on and just saying what they are. So green infrastructure, natural features that perform critical natural processes like cleaning our water, cleaning our air, climate change resilience. And nature-based solutions and low-impact development are the actions or strategies that protect, restore, and/or manage green infrastructure. Next slide, please. So low-impact development, a little more specifically, there are development design standards that utilize plants and soils in capturing and filtering water, while at the same time minimizing imperviousness all around. So this is an example, Concord Riverwalk. This is a development that used a lot of low impact development, and they have, as you can see, a shared green space behind all of the condos. So low impact development treats water as a resource and not just a waste product. So not only does it absorb this stormwater and prevent it from running off, this infiltrated water also replenishes our groundwater supply. And this is going to be increasingly important given climate change, and that one of the climate change impacts is increasing drought. Low impact development also manages stormwater as close to its source as possible, rather than moving the water and treating it elsewhere. And it preserves natural landscape by recreating natural features. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of low impact development. Rain gardens, you'll see these quite commonly. So this one in Devens, Massachusetts gathers runoff from a curbless road and sidewalk and infiltrates the stormwater back into the ground. Green roofs are another example. So this photo on top is a green roof in Boston, Massachusetts, an obviously urban area. But on the bottom, you'll see a small roof in a more rural area of Vermont. And the idea here is to absorb rainwater before it runs off of the roof. And lastly, permeable pavement. So this is a parking lot in Narragansett, Rhode Island. And on the left, you can see traditional asphalt and therefore all of the pooling of water on top. And then on the right, you'll see the permeable pavement and where the water has almost completely soaked through. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a bit about why these nature-based solutions can be such an important tool for us and for dealing with climate change. and I'm going to tell you about a resource you might use to communicate about them in your community. So we performed a large literature review, and we pulled facts and figures into a set of 5 fact sheets on the value of nature. And these are available at massaudubon.org/value of nature. So they are forests, coastal areas, wetlands and waterways, grasslands and farmland, and urban green space. So the services or benefits from these ecosystems that we cover are relatively constant across each fact sheet, varies a little bit, but climate resilience is a big one, clean air and water, carbon capture and storage, economic and health, and recreation and tourism. So these primarily cover the benefits of nature for people, but we also touch on wildlife a little bit. And each fact sheet on the back side also has a few blurbs on the impacts that climate change and development are having on these different ecosystems. So in terms of communications, we created these to try to address the challenge of getting cities and towns to prioritize nature. So sharing the economic and public health benefits of nature is important for doing this, particularly when trying to convince local decision makers or legislators. So you're talking to them about something that they can a little more easily get their constituents behind, and also get support from other people who work at the municipality, for example, those who work in public health. So we wanted to keep all of the information at least relevant to New England communities, which are our primary audience for these. And we wanted the readers to be able to see themselves in the fact sheets and feel close to the issues to spark action. So when you read a fact about rainforests, for example, it might not feel close enough to home and be enough to spark that action. So you'll remember Rish talking about psychological distance. So a fact about rainforests in the Amazon might kind of create that distance a little bit more. And you can go further in tailoring your communications to your audience by choosing to use just 1 or 2 of the fact sheets and not all 5. So you can ask yourself which ecosystem or ecosystems are most relevant to my audience. Is it forest? Is it coastal? And you can just choose those. And then you can also pull info across the fact sheets on just one benefit or service, like economic and health. So you can ask yourself which services or benefits might my audience care about the most. So think back to Rishya talking about finding an object of care. So is that object of care water quality? Is it air quality? Is it cooling an urban environment down a little bit more? Okay, next slide, please. So a few examples of some stats that are included in these fact sheets. So salt marshes are absolutely one of the most effective ecosystems on the planet for slowing climate change. They keep huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere by trapping and burying organic matter. So you'll see here that the total land area of salt marshes is very, very small in comparison to that of temperate forests, tropical forests, and boreal forests. However, the total carbon burial for salt marshes is larger than all of those different kinds of forests. So a huge impact and a very important tool that we should be taking advantage of. Next, please. So also this is from our coastal fact sheet. So coastal wetlands in the northeastern US saved $625 million in flooding damages by Hurricane Sandy. Next, please. From grasslands and farmland, pollinators contribute $24 billion to the US economy, and 45% of Massachusetts agricultural goods rely on pollinators for crop pollination. So without pollinators, we would not have 45% of our agricultural commodities. Next, please. And lastly, urban forests can have a tremendous impact and should certainly not be ignored. So every year, urban forests in the 15 communities of Metro West Boston remove 7.5 million pounds of air pollutants, avoid 527 million gallons of stormwater runoff with a value of 4.7 million, and they store 962,000 tons of carbon worth 125 million, and this is each year. Next, please. So we have these great nature-based solutions, but how do we actually incorporate them into our communities so that we can get all of these benefits? So Massachusetts Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program provides funding for communities to prepare for the impacts of climate change. Some of you may already be familiar with this program. And the program prioritizes projects that use nature-based solutions. So I know that your community actually already is an MVP designated community from 2019 and have completed one more project. But this is an extremely useful tool to and grant program to take advantage because the action grants can really address anything that you put into your planning proposal. And it can range from planting trees or conserving a piece of land that is particularly important for climate change. So many, many possibilities. And there's more information about this on mass.gov/MVP. And when you're talking to members of other communities, I also would encourage, mentioning this program because that's a big focus of what Mass Audubon is doing now, is trying to encourage the use of this great program. Next, please. So this is just an example of an MVP action project that we frequently talk about. So Millbury used their $1 million action grant to install green infrastructure like rain gardens and impervious pavement in their downtown area to reduce temperatures in the city and stormwater runoff into the Blackstone River. So this project really did a great job of demonstrating the co-benefits of incorporating nature into a revitalization project. Okay, and lastly, I wanted to point out a partner of ours, the Mass ECAN, so Massachusetts Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. So they just recently came out with this great resource through collaboration of the Mass ECAN affiliated Mainstream Nature-Based Solutions Work Group and the Climate Communications Work Group. And it's called Taking Cues from Nature to Adapt to Climate Change. And it's all about communicating nature-based solutions. And one thing I love about this is that it provides local examples of the use of nature-based solutions in our communities, and ranging from forest conservation projects to smaller scale, low impact development projects. Okay, I went through that pretty quickly, so we have time for questions. But please feel free to jump in, and there is our contact information too.
Oh, it's not moving. Oh, there we go. Great. So yeah, you can either unmute yourself to ask any questions, put them in the chat. I can't see them, but Paige and Kathy probably can. Thank you so much for having us today. I think it's been great to kind of converse with all of you and discuss climate communications, but also the importance of nature-based solutions. So if you don't want to ask your questions here and now, that's fine. You can always contact us by emailing us at climatechange@massaudubon.org. We'll either respond to you directly or forward you to one of our members of our team, depending on what you're interested in. So we have an education manager, we have a climate adaptation ecologist, we have a lot of really awesome members of our team. If you want any more information on some of the work that Mass Audubon is doing regarding climate action, just visit us at massaudubon.org/climate. We'll have ways for you to take action, and then we'll also have ways for you to get involved and reach out to us. And then finally, stay in contact. We have an e-newsletter that goes out every month with climate information, solutions, action opportunities, events, all sorts of really fun things. One thing I think this group might really love is Mass Audubon hosts and offers to host climate cafes in different communities. And those are judgment-free zones where we just talk about climate change and we talk about specific topics and facilitate a really great discussion. So if you want to stay up to date, you can visit massaudubon.org/enews and sign up for our e-news. Make sure to click the little checkbox that goes next to Climate Connection, which is the name of our e-newsletter, before hitting submit. So you ensure that you're signing up for our e-news too.
Wow. I have some questions. I don't want to, you thinking that we don't have a lot of questions. I just don't know how to, where to start. First of all, I do the website for our climate group. So right away I thought, oh, I would love to link to some of those resources, Mass Audubon's climate group information, and get people subscribing. Also that wonderful video with Greta, and I don't know if I need to get permissions to do this, or can I just add the links to all of those places. The ECAN, a Mass ECAN, I hadn't heard about that before. And I also have to say, I didn't realize Mass Audubon had so many resources on climate change. Julie is the one that mentioned it first months ago, and we got in touch with you in Alexandra. But also the cafes, I'll talk to Jessica about that. That sounds like a really fun program to get involved in and encourage people to go to. Man, I just feel like you gave us so much information, and I've got so many notes. I can't even get through them all. But I might be sending you some emails on just questions. So I don't want to take up all the time because other folks might have some questions too.
Yeah, I know I have some time, Paige. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm happy to stay a little bit extra and answer anything.
Yeah, I can too. Yeah, absolutely.
I just have a quick question. So you talk about telling your stories, and as I mentioned at the beginning, that I've been trying to write some articles, because we kind of came to this agreement a few months ago that we want to try to get more word out to people, and we kind of understand that we need to make it more local and to get people interested. And we came up with this idea of maybe publishing a series of articles starting with Did You Know, and then just have different subjects. The problem is we can't seem to get them published. I don't know if you have any ideas on what's the best way to get something into a local newspaper. I think the part of the problem is just that the news cycle in the last few months has just been unbelievable. I mean, it's been crisis upon crisis, and in our sleepy little local newspaper that used to be quite boring, to be quite honest, is suddenly got all these different topics to discuss, and we just can't seem to break through. I don't know if there's is there a particular time of week when it's the best to reach out to an editor?
There definitely is. This is a really great question. So I would encourage you to do 3 things. Every newspaper outlet typically has different publishing deadlines for when they need to submit their papers. I want to say when I was working at Save the Harbor, Save the Bay for local Boston outlets, it was Friday at 12. So we would always try to get things in before Friday at 12 if we were pitching press releases. So I would try to figure out what's the deadline for your local newspaper, because I can't speak to, they all have different deadlines. Some of them are standard, some of them aren't. It really just depends on the paper. The second thing I would do is pitching is really difficult, especially for local newspapers. When I was in grad school, I had to pitch a couple times and it was hard. I feel the struggle that you're feeling right now. I think one of the best things to do is kind of take a step back, look at what you've learned. And from what you just told me, it sounds like what you've learned is that a lot of the stories have been crisis focused or emergency focused, perhaps COVID, perhaps the election, right? And find a way to make your story unique in lieu of all of that. And then in the process of trying to find a way to make your story unique based on what's running in the news already, you should be able to answer the question, why is this important? Why should I care? This is a this is something you should do for all communications, but for news-based, outlet-based communications in particular, that why should I care question should be one of the first things you answer, and one of the first answers you should be able to provide clearly and succinctly when pitching. So sea levels are rising. Did you know that? Why should I care? Right? You should be able to answer that question, especially in the context of your community and what you're seeing right now. So thinking back to local, thinking back to temporal, and all of that work making climate change proximal. So that would be my advice to you. I'm sorry I can't give you exact days and times. It's always so confusing with newspaper outlets.
No, I wouldn't expect you to be able to, because I'm sure everyone is different. I guess what I was getting at is yeah, I mean, I can see in my paper that they have a deadline, but will you get their attention? Are you more likely to get their attention earlier in the cycle or later in the cycle, or, you know?
I've had success with both. I've had success with like the day before, because one of my old bosses, and this is informal advice, but one of my old bosses always used to tell me, well, that's the time when the journalists who haven't had time to write a story need a story. And so you send it in like a little bit closer to the deadline and they'll grab the story. I've also had success sending it in way before, so they have time to look at it, have a conversation with you, and really digest the piece before publishing. So I would go either end, to not try like every day of the week, but try in the beginning and then try close to the end, those two.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a question. You didn't say anything about solar, and you know, I mean, solar is so promising, but we need to consider the compatibility with nature-based solutions, and when they, use cover up open spaces or actually cut down
Absolutely.
woods, that's an anathema. So what do you gals think is a way to scale up solar without, impairing the nature-based solutions? I mean, I heard of one thing just the other day, is floating solar farms on man-made ponds. I mean, you wouldn't want to put it in a marsh area and, degrade that. But what do you think are the ways to, rooftops, great, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you got a garden on the rooftop that you're, compromising. But so, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I'm curious if you looked at Mass Audubon's Losing Ground report.
No?
If you've taken a look at that, okay, so that's massaudubon.org/losingground. And this edition was number 6, Nature's Value in a Changing Climate. And one of our findings actually was 1/4 of new development in Massachusetts was solar related because of ground mounted solar arrays. And, if our current trend had continued, we would have declined in our rate of development, acres per day, but we're actually starting to increase a little bit. And we think that's because of solar development on the ground. So what we promote is rooftop solar and solar canopies over particularly parking lot mm-hmm. solar. And there's more about that in the report in our recommendation section that you could look at. Oh, thank you, Rish. Wait, sorry, that was, lose ground. Okay, cool. So that would be my recommendation to take a look at that report, because it was definitely a big focus this time around.
So I have a question about that town, I think it was Millbury,
Mm-hmm.
you gave as an example. They got a grant from somewhere. Is that from the government, the state, or? And they had to convince their township, I presume this grant didn't cover everything. That there were some expenses in the town that were not covered by the grant. So there's got to be some kind of a narrative that one can make that that would convince people, say from a conservative area, that it's worthwhile spending money on nature-based solutions. We have a tree committee in town, which I'm told has not put in a single tree in the last 10 years or something like that. Is that right, Tom?
Yep, Tom, unmute.
Tom?
I don't know if it's that much, but it's not been very really active. Yeah,
They're
we
looking
could
for
definitely
members.
use more, effort at, preserving the trees we have and planting more trees. I don't think we're doing much on that right now. That's an area to get involved with for our team.
Yeah. Yeah,
We need
so,
to find them some
so
members.
I guess we're looking for narratives to ramp that up in our town here. And I wonder if you can point us to some of the reports or the areas that you have that would help us out.
Sure, yeah, so yeah, the Millbury project that I was talking about, so 1 million did come from the state MVP grant. I'm not sure exactly where the remaining money came from, but I know you're right that it wasn't all MVP funded. But I guess in terms of, so are you asking specifically for that tree planting that isn't, that you can't get to happen? Like how to build support around that? Or, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, in that case, I would, from my perspective, take a look at the urban green space fact sheet in particular. And then also in the forest fact sheet, we have a section on urban forests. So just focusing on them and their benefits for communities. And then also if cost is becoming an issue, so you're expressing how great trees are and it's just not getting through and they're like, it's too expensive, we don't know the costs. We also have a set of LID, low impact development fact sheets that go a little bit more into the cost savings of using green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure in communities. So it's a little bit smaller, on a smaller scale than these value of nature fact sheets, and could be helpful if it's really not getting through to anybody.
Yeah, and I know one thing, Bern, you mentioned both now and in the beginning is kind of crossing this political divide of partisanship. And I think that's really where objects of care come into play, where we're connecting based on the value and not the polarizing crisis. And that doesn't mean we're disregarding the polarizing crisis. It just means the value comes first, right? So is the value restoring, protecting, for example, urban natural spaces for wildlife habitats? That could be a co-benefit for nature-based solutions, right? And that's the value you would be connecting over. And then climate resilience and climate adaptation comes in. So the solution is climate adaptation or climate resilience, but the core is the value. And I think that's something, I was in a really interesting webinar, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I feel like I'm getting Zoom fatigue. You all probably know what I mean with COVID. But I think it was 2 weeks ago, and it was how to strategically communicate about climate, similar to this, but it talked about politics and psychology and government and all of these different things. And we actually had a conservative environmentalist speak on crossing the political divide. And one of the things that he said that really stood out to me is that everyone loves going outdoors. Everyone loves nature, right? There are values that some of us have that maybe we, don't all share because of political standings, but everyone ubiquitously loves nature and going outdoors. That is an object of care that we can use to connect with people and inspire climate action.
I have a question too about, the MVP program that Chelmsford's a part of. So do I understand that we could, because we're part of that program, municipal, I forget the full title, but you know what I mean, if we'd be able to maybe help the town apply for some grants for things like rain gardens or even pollinator gardens, or what was it, heat islands? I need to look into that a little more. But is that something we'd be able to do? As a group, we could probably at least be a partner in a grant, maybe.
Yeah, so now that you're as MVP designated, as it's called, you're eligible to apply for these action grants from the state. So yeah, I certainly recommend getting involved with the municipal staff if you can, and say, you know, hey, I think it would be really great if we had a project where we planted these rain gardens in this certain area, or, you know, look at your town and see, you know, where there might be opportunities. And yeah, I certainly encourage bringing it up to municipal staff, because the MVP program is supposed to be, you know, they say a community-led process. So so that's a main goal of theirs.
Yeah,
So,
we both have to do that. Again, we're not going to get bored, are we?
No, right. Andrew said it very well. I'm also, you know, I'm sure that I know grants, when you receive them, they each have their own kind of communications restrictions or not. And so I'm just thinking about Julie, you know, in terms of articles, think about the story you could tell if the climate action team were to work towards one of these grants and get some money for a rain garden or permeable asphalt or whatever it might be. Think about the story you could tell with that in the local newspaper. That would definitely be some kind of communications work you could do.
I also wanted to ask about the Yale report. How can we get a copy of that? I know it's going to be all on the web, right? I love the internet. Let me see.
I just put a link in the chat. It is the link to the Yale program. We call them YPCCC for short, the wonderful world of acronyms. And you can kind of filter through the formats of their publications. So if you just want the reports, there's a little checkbox all the way to the right for the reports. But they just released one April 2020. That's their newest one. And there's some fabulous findings in that. I think there's, you know, findings about ethnicities that care more about climate change and like political beliefs and climate change, and they do just amazing work, and I refer to them constantly when I'm doing work for Mass Audubon in terms of strategizing how we're communicating climate.
Wow, goodness. I have so many questions, but I wasn't very organized in writing down my notes. I have to email you afterwards.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't want to keep you too long because I know you've got a lot going on. Are there other questions from anyone before we lose this opportunity?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
When I'm listening to about tree planting not going on, I'm reminded that in my immediate neighborhood, there have been several houses that have paid thousands of dollars to have trees removed, 10 or 12 80-foot plus oak trees being removed from their lots. Apparently there is no control over clearing your lot or any restrictions whatsoever. Is that anything that's ever been considered as something like that? Do you need approval? Apparently you don't.
I know you need approval to have a house old or a building older than 100 years. You have to get approval for that, but the tree could be older than that. Good question.
Yeah, I don't know about any restrictions for trees on personal property.
No.
Probably only if it's within so many feet of a wetland, probably. But no, I mean, imagine people would be up in arms. You know,
Right.
The government can't tell us what to do on our property, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people, they remove trees because they're afraid of them falling and damaging their homes.
Also don't like the leaves on their lawns.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, I had a tree removed because it was blocking my solar panels.
Oh, well, that I can understand.
But I think you're right. I didn't have to get permission to do it.
Right, and that's where, you know, if you have forests in your area, especially, you know, Massachusetts has a ton of old growth forests. That's where advocating for their preservation and protection comes extra into play, right? Because we don't really have any restrictions on personal property, then we need to do our best to conserve what already exists on public property and government property. So
The other thing I noticed is that over the weekend, there was a posting by the Acton Climate Group on Chelmsford Facebook site, and it got almost immediate comments coming that were very negative. And I wonder where those are coming from. Are they some sort of right-wing bots that are identifying these sites and putting in stuff, or what the heck is going on that it'd be that quick?
I
I
think it could be somewhat, that
Yeah.
could be part of the problem, because there was a town Facebook page that used to be more newsy, but lately it's been really negative, and I just didn't even want to look at it anymore. So
yeah, well,
look at it. That
I'm-
campaign. We get through the campaign, maybe. I hope things will.
but what the other thing I noticed about the comments is that Greta and AOC seem to be rallying cries for the right
Yes.
to ignore anything about climate.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
very discouraging.
Mhm. I know it is. It's really, it shouldn't be so political.
No, it shouldn't be.
No,
The
you're right.
other thing I might make a comment on is that when you look at the long-term effects of climate change, I think people don't realize that one, the climate projections about how much sea level rise will occur are changing year by year, because it is it's happening much faster than any of these linear projections predicted. I saw recently comments by James Hansen and that kind of stuff that what really is likely to happen is that at least half of the coastal cities in the world will end up underwater if we let this go. I don't think people will realize that if the South Pole and Greenland melt, that we're talking about 200 feet of sea level rise, not a few feet. And all of this seems to be happening much quicker than expected at this point. I don't think that point is getting out to the general population very well.
So one thing Mass Audubon is actually, we're experimenting with next week is, in terms of communicating the severity of sea level rise, is doing a kind of mini community science endeavor with king tides. Because king tides as they stand are a great way to visualize what our future will look like by 2050 in terms of sea level. So how high king tides are rising right now, yeah, I think it's like twice a year or something like that, could be a reality in 2050 because of sea level rise. So we're getting tips out, a blog post out on how to go and take photos for My Coast, who's collecting the photos, and they're going to do some scientific analysis on it to assess vulnerability across the region. But that's one really great way to think about how we tell a story here and now, even with something that's going to happen in the future, right? King tides happen here and now, but they help us visualize what will happen in the future and what the future might look like.
And the other thing that I might comment is, I don't think people realize that if sea level rise goes up that much, we're not talking about a few $1 trillion in infrastructure loss. We're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars of infrastructure being destroyed in these cities. And, the cost of doing something now is so much less than that, that it's ridiculous not to be doing something at this point. Because the costs are just going to become enormously higher or impossible.
Yeah, those are good points. Really.
Well, hey, Dale, have you looked at what the people are saying that poo-hoo sea level rise? What are their arguments? I mean, you see it as, an emergency.
They seem to have very derogatory comments about anybody who thinks that climate change is real. I'm in the unfortunate position, or fortunate for knowledge of some of these things, that many of my immediate family members of my age, at least, are diehard Republicans that don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
I am shocked that I can't convince any of them that this is a problem you have to do something about. Now, maybe that's
Yeah.
because their thinking is not coming from reasoning or evidence or that kind of stuff. There was some articles in Scientific American recently about why people believe what they believe. And a lot of it has to do with politics. Even scientists who are politically motivated not to believe in science and climate change because they're not climate scientists. And other people who are non-scientists seem to think that those people must know what they're talking about because they're scientists, but they don't. They absolutely don't know what's going on. And, you know, they can get into technical arguments that sound like they might be reasonable, but I'm quite aware that they are false. And you can't convince people. I don't know how you go about doing this.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
To be a downer, but you know, it's, I've been on this climate thing for over a decade and reading about it and that kind of stuff. And the general beliefs are so far away from reality or what they seem to try to isolate all of the climate scientists, of which there are probably, I don't know, 10,000 or something worldwide. They probably published something in the order of 15 or 20,000 papers by now. There isn't any doubt in the scientific community that's familiar with the evidence, but that is not getting through to the general population. It's being drowned out.
Well, did you see the debate last night?
Oh, goodness.
Mike Pence said, we'll follow the climate science.
Well, I don't think he knows what it is.
Yeah.
They're looking still. I don't want to keep Rishya and Paige too much longer because they've been so generous with their time. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise. You've given us some great perspectives and a lot of help to help us as we go out and try to do the work we're doing. And hopeful perspectives, I think that's important. I think we you know, have learned a lot. And I do want to make a couple of last comments. I want to let everybody, remind everybody about the October 22nd talk with Nia Keith, who's also from Mass Audubon. And she's going to talk on climate justice. That's an evening program at 7 o'clock. So please help us pass the word. And I think Bern has already sent out a lot of notices about that to local churches and so on. And then in November, a climate conversation program on that Thursday afternoon is with Chelmsford's own Melissa Joyce, who's our sustainability manager. And we're going to try to firm down some ways that we can get more involved with her department and with the town, because we're kind of not town sponsored, except for the fact the library has helped us out with getting our programs on Zoom and so on. I think those are the two things. The other thing I want to mention is that both Rishya and Paige and Nia have are doing this as part of the Mass Audubon, their employer, but they haven't charged us a fee, which has been really good for us because we don't have any income. And we want to just let everybody know that they can certainly help thank them and show our appreciation by making donations to Mass Audubon. I'm assuming we just go to massaudubon.org and we'd find a way, a link there.
I can put it in the chat if you want, since I've already drowned the chat with all these links.
I know, but once we close, then we lose that ability to.
You should be able to save it, but here, I'll put it.
True. We do have. So it's just Mass. Wait a minute. Audubon.
I believe if you want to donate to the climate program in particular, I believe it's massaudubon.org/climate donate, but I'm just going to check that right now.
.org/climate
donate.
Donate. Ah, thank you. Okay, I think I got that right.
If you want to save your chat, there's three little dots down at the lower right. just click on those and it says Save Chat, and it'll show up in your documents. If you have a Windows machine, it'll show up in documents under Zoom.
Okay, good. Thank you, Vern. Boy, I'm learning a lot more than just climate change stuff. Okay, I'm gonna have to show this off to my children. So anyway, I just do, for the group, I want to say thank you so much to both of you, Paige and Rishya. And I think we're all going to be checking out the website. So
Right.
we'll be giving you more traffic that way. Yeah. And do either of you have any closing comments or anything that you want to share? I don't want to cut you off.
Thanks very much. I really learned a lot. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Great. No,
Me too.
We loved talking to all of you. I think this was really engaging and really fun. You have our email address, our climate change email address. You can reach both Paige and myself that way. But Kathy, Jessica, thanks so much for having us, and thank you all so much for listening and sharing with us.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Okay. Thank you all.
Terrific. Terrific.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay. You too.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Nose. Exit full. Oh dear.
Okay.
I'm not good at closing this up. I can never find the button. I don't know.
Before you all sign off, don't forget our meeting on Monday night. If you have any things for the agenda, please send me a note. I'll send out announcements by the end of the day tomorrow, probably.
That's Monday the 12th, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Is that Columbus Day?
Oh, yeah, there it is. I've got it on my calendar.
Yeah, yeah.
It is Columbus Day, but I'm not
I
celebrating
think that won't matter as far as our group is concerned, probably.
No, I had no plans to celebrate that. I think it's my mother's birthday, but she's always in my memory. So 7 o'clock on Monday, right?
7:30, I think.
7:30.
7:30.
Yeah, okay.
I'll send out a note with some links.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. Well, they were
That
really
was
good.
really great, Kathy. Good.
Good.
And Julie, that was a great session, I thought.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
They were very good. Wow. I've got to go over that. So Jessica, I saw that you did record it, and I did ask them already about that, so we have their permission. And I also told them that we like to put it out on our website. So I can't remember how we get it. You send us the recording or the link to the recording, right?
I can send you the link to the recording, and we'll keep it in our cloud space for maybe like a week. And so when you receive the recording, it doesn't process immediately. It'll probably process later this afternoon or this evening. So I'll send it to you, and then you'll have a week to download it to your own computers. And then
we're supposed to
I can't
download
do it definitely because we have other things to record, and we only have a limited amount of memory space that we can hold it there for.
Okay,
But,
I should check the other ones that I have out there to see if they're still even there. I forgot about that. I was thinking they were, yeah.
If you send it to Pete, he generally will post it if you wanted to do it that way.
To Pete?
Pete Padula.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We could put it on the libraries too. Library has a YouTube account, so I could put it there.
Yeah. Oh, so it would always be out there. We could always access it, huh?
Yeah, well, you can take that and embed it into your site.
Okay. Oh, all right. That's good. I'm not sure how to embed things, but I'll figure it out. We'll do that. I usually just put the title, the date, and then link it to, I think it was Pete Padula has some of them, but I don't know about all of these.
Yeah, Pete will do it for you, but he doesn't do it right away.
Yeah.
He has a lot of other things to do, so he puts it in a queue and he'll get around to it. But if I put it up on YouTube, it won't be edited or anything like that. But it'll be there for you to access.
Yeah.
In the meantime, while we wait for Pete to do something with it.
All right.
Kathy, is it easy for you to download files like that to the website and actually have them local on the website?
I don't know if I'll have enough space. I just had to buy more space
Oh, okay.
for my own stuff.
So how much space do you have?
I don't know. I just know that I kept getting messages for the past couple months, and I ended up buying a little more. But I'll tell you,
All right.
I don't know the difference between a
It's
gigabyte.
it's better to leave it on YouTube, Tom.
Yeah, if I
Yeah.
can do that, that's
And I think the one advantage of getting Pete to do it is that he can edit the front of it out. Sometimes he puts a little sign in front saying what the thing is.
okay. Well, we can.
Okay.
I'll watch for what I get from Jessica, and then on our business meeting, maybe we can go over it a little bit more. I don't want to keep Jessica because
Right.
she's doing double
Yeah.
duty there.
Yeah. And we definitely don't want dead links, you know.
Oh, I know
In the
it.
future.
Yeah, that won't look good. I'll get rid of any of those. Okay. Well, thank you.
Great.
We'll see you Monday for our business meeting. And Jessica, let me know if there's anything you want me to do. If you need me to do anything on this, I don't know.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Beautiful day. Let's get
Thanks.
outside.
Yes,
Yeah.
Enjoy
yes,
nature.
yes.
Okay.
Good idea.
Thank you,
Nice seeing you
Jessica.
all.
Okay, see you
Thanks,
Monday.
everyone. Bye.
Okay. Ciao.
Bye. Bye, guys.